Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. My guest today is an art historian and a historical novelist. Laura Morelli has written several best-selling books. She's lived all over France and the world for that matter. And she's also been involved with the TED Talks, National Geographic, Italian magazines, CNN radio. The list goes on and on. She's lived a fascinating life. And today we talk about her writing and her new book, The Stolen Lady. So welcome to the show, Laura. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hello, Crystal. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
You have been a busy woman. I mean, you've written multiple books. You lived in France. You lived all over France. And now your newest book is talking about the Mona Lisa and the history. And there's just so many questions I have for you. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. These are some of my favorite topics, and France is one of my favorite places. So thank you.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your time in France. I mean, when you were here, you spent 4 years and you wrote a book called Made in France, exploring like basically all the best things France has to offer. Talk about that time in your life.
Yeah, well, actually, the first time I visited France, I was a very impressionable 12-year-old, and I was fortunate enough to travel quite a bit in my youth. I grew up on a farm in Georgia, so if you hear the Southern accent, that's where that came from. But I was fortunate enough to travel, and I can distinctly remember standing in front of the facade of the Cathedral of Notre Dame and sort of, one of those moments where the heavens opened up and the rays of the sun came down. It was such an incredible moment in my life. And I have a picture of me standing there. And sometimes I go back and, look at this very awkward looking preteen with a scowl on her face in the way that only a 12-year-old can make.
Yeah.
Right? But yet, at the same time, I just thought, wow, look, there was so much there that I wanted to know, that I wanted to learn about. It was the beginning of a journey for me to learn how to speak other languages. It was the beginning of a journey and a curiosity about art history and history in general. And so Paris really made an incredible mark. And I think when you're, in that stage of your life and young like that, something like a travel experience can have a really formative effect. When I was a young child, I was obsessed with books. And so, I'm in my 50s now, and I look back and laugh because I think, those were the things that I was really passionate about as a young person was books and art and travel. And those things sort of came together for me later as an adult. But, I think those formative experiences when you're a young person and a young child are really important.
Yeah, I want to touch back on that. I mean, so many of us, we have things that we love as children, as young people, and we kind of lose sight of them, like bills come into play, the real world comes into play. So were you able to follow those pursuits, like those dreams from a young age, or did you kind of have to bypass and do like a real job for a moment before you become like a full-time writer, art historian? I mean, it looks like writing has really taken off for you.
Well, it's, I consider myself very fortunate because I have always, my parents were very supportive, and I always had the understanding that I could, they told me I could do whatever I wanted, and that, that I could pursue my passion. So they were very supportive, and I think that's huge. And I realize that not everyone has that behind them. So I did go on to study art history, but I did become very serious I was a very serious student and went on and pursued a Ph.D. in art history. I really thought that my destiny was to be an academic. And so I did finish my PhD. I did start teaching at the university. As you probably know, academic writing is a very serious thing, and
Yeah.
takes a lot of kind of skill to write in that way. And it was when I was sort of in this academic box, which I guess is probably similar to a lot of the way people feel in having a real job and sort of squelching those creative impulses. It was at that point in my life where those creative impulses that I had as a child started to, beat down the door and wouldn't
Mhm.
let me kind of ignore them anymore.
Yeah.
Certainly when I got to a point in my academic career where I was giving talks and going to symposia and I was writing academic papers. One day I can remember yawning in the back of a conference and thinking, wow, how did this happen that we took the most fascinating topic in the world, art history, and we made it so dull and boring? And it was at that moment that I thought there's got to be a way to bring the excitement and the passion behind this topic um, back. There's got to be a way to kind of bring that back. And so I started writing creatively again for the first time since I was a young child. And it was then that I'd realized I could sort of marry my academic expertise in art history with a more creative writing life. And that's when the sort of wheels hit the track for me, I guess, and I found my niche.
Yeah, I love historical fiction. It's one of my favorite type of books. I know there's a lot of like controversy, like bending the truth and things like that. But for me, it's what really keeps me hooked. It's like knowing like a piece of this is very true, but then weaving in another story.
Well, I think there are a lot of readers, who have no interest in picking up a textbook, or they don't necessarily want to go in that direction. They want a story. They want to know what the past felt like, what it smelled like, what it tasted like, what it looked like, what it was like
Yeah.
to experience a time and place in the past. And so I think historical fiction serves that role very well. It allows us to kind of immerse ourselves in another world, much the way that a science fiction writer, creates a world for us to step into. I think
Mhm.
historical fiction is very similar to that. But at the same time, we have the opportunity to learn about maybe a time or a place that we didn't learn about in school, or that we want to explore and can't go there in person
Yeah.
necessarily. So it's definitely a way to time travel and learn something new without getting hit over the head with a textbook.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you just explained why I love those kind of books so much. And let's talk about your new book, The Stolen Lady. I want to know all about it, what it was like writing it, what it's about. Obviously, the Mona Lisa is involved. Tell us more.
Thank you. The Stolen Lady is a historical novel that centers around the Mona Lisa, and it's a dual timeline story. So it goes back and forth between the creation of the portrait in Florence, Italy in about 1500, and then to Paris and the French countryside in the 1940s. Now, you probably know that the Mona Lisa and the entire collection of the Louvre almost was hidden during World War II. The Nazis attempted to steal every known painting by Leonardo da Vinci during those years.
Wow.
They halfway succeeded. They did manage to steal a few of his pictures, but the Mona Lisa, thankfully, was not one of them. There were very close calls. The portrait was moved several times across the French countryside to chateaux and to privately owned properties, where she was hiding in a wooden crate along with many other works of art from the Louvre. And it's really one of the most incredible true adventures of World War II, the story of the evacuation of the Louvre and the protection of these works of art from enemy hands. So I really wanted to approach it from the eye of a novelist. The subject has been really well treated by historians, both the story of the Mona Lisa in the Italian Renaissance as well as the story of the Louvre. If you want to read a great nonfiction book, Jerry Chanel's book, it's called Saving Mona Lisa, is sort of the nonfiction true story.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to, feel and experience what it was like to be in those chateaux of the Loire with the Mona Lisa, then you'll probably want to read my book, which is called The Stolen Lady.
And tell me about the research for the book. I mean, you knew the history being an art historian, but how did you sit down and really piece this story together?
Well, it was, a combination of a lot of different things. I mean, under normal circumstances, I would have been back in France. I would have been in one of my very favorite places in the world, which is the reading room in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Opening those acid-free crates,
Yeah.
smelling that paper and that old paper, and it's just such a great smell for me. But needless to say, the pandemic had other plans. So I did, my colleagues in France were extremely helpful via email, but I also went back to my good old-fashioned library research, which I, of course, did a lot of as an academic. And now it's wonderful that we can do so much of it online or through interlibrary loan. So I always start a historical novel with primary sources. So a primary source is something that was written at the time. And I think it's helpful to hear people's voices of the era.
Yeah.
So, I went back to Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. I went back to historical documents from the Italian Renaissance. I went back to memoirs from the Louvre staff that were written in the 1930s and 40s so that I could hear their voices and hear what they thought. It's interesting because you always are aware of what people choose to include and perhaps also what they choose to omit.
Yeah.
Or aggrandize in some way. And so that's a very interesting way, I think, to look at primary sources, is to ask yourself, what are they revealing? What are they perhaps hiding? What are they sharing and what are they omitting? And from that, you can start to form a character in your mind, and so that's a really fun part of the process for me.
And when you were doing your research, was there anything you discovered that was surprising that you weren't expecting?
Well, gosh, always there are things like that in a research project. I mean, a few things. One is I think it's just amazing when you realize the scale of art theft during World War II. You may have seen the Monuments Men movie or read the book, or you may, know a little something about it. But the scale of it to me is always surprising and staggering. And then just to realize the number of people who were involved on both sides, both to try to, procure or quote unquote safeguard these works, for the Germans, but also to safeguard them on the other side. And there are so many interesting characters in there. I'm working on a new book now that continues kind of along these lines. Of exploring the lives of people who were involved in protecting works of art during wartime, because it is a really fascinating topic. And the Mona Lisa being, just this icon of art history was, of course, right in the crosshairs of all of this. And so it was a very interesting place to start, I think, with this topic.
And when you first started to write this book, all my guests talk about like the creative whispers, like they had this little voice in their head saying, oh, this idea, and like, I should pursue this. Like, was this something you had in your mind for a while, that you wanted to write this story about Mona Lisa and her being hidden in World War and all that? Like, was this somewhere in your mind for a while?
I think, many novelists have ideas that percolate over many years. And for me, I'll go back to that same first trip to France when I was 12. I mean, it was the first time I saw Mona Lisa. And one of the primary sources that I went back to for this book was actually my diary from that trip. And I opened the page and I said, okay, what did I have to say as 12-year-old Laura about the Mona Lisa? And I wrote down found that, yes, I had seen the Mona Lisa smile, but really I thought she looked a little sad. And, so it was this idea of the possibly sad Mona Lisa that sort of stuck with me, and it stuck with me for decades. And I, never was going to do anything necessarily, never thought to really do anything with that. But at some point, when I finished my last book, which is called The Night Portrait, which is about another portrait by Leonardo da Vinci, when I, closed that project, then, was ready to start something new, there was that idea of the Mona Lisa smiling, but perhaps not happy, that sort of came back into my head. And so it's fascinating how these creative projects and ideas sort of stick with you over long periods of time, and they sort of fade into the background for a while. But I think, if you have a great project or a must-do project, if it's an idea that won't let you go over, a long period of time.
Yeah, if it keeps reappearing in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I had another book. I wrote a book called The Giant, which is based on the creation of Michelangelo's David. And that's one that I really tried to put away for several times. I tried to say, oh, no, I tried to write it as a nonfiction book, and I decided against it, put it in a drawer. One day I pulled it back out and said, oh, this is a novel. I worked on it for a while and put it away, and I thought, no, I'm not going to work on that one. But it was an idea that would not let me go. And so I did end up writing the book, and it's one of my readers' favorites. I think, anytime a book is a story is a book of your heart, it comes through. And so, any kind of creative project like that, that stays with you and is sort of a project of your heart, is something I think you have to do.
I like that, a project of your heart. That's really sweet. Maybe you were one of Leonardo's students in another life,
Maybe so.
I love it. And walk me through your writing process. Like, how do you prepare? Do you go for a walk? Do you meditate? What do you do before you sit down?
So I am a pretty analytical person. I'm not a numbers person at all, but I do love spreadsheets, which is probably the most nerdy thing I've ever, right? But I do start with a spreadsheet, and I start with an outline. And so, that is something that is important to me, is to know what the end is going to be. And I sort of plot out some major points. I guess an analogy might be that if you were driving, let's say, from Paris to the coast of southern France to Nice, let's say, you would plot the towns and cities along the way, from the beginning to the end of your trip. And so for me, writing a novel is similar in the way that I start. I sort of consider it like a map, where I know the beginning, I know the end, and I know some major milestones along the way. And that's where I always start. And I will say that very often the route changes.
Yeah.
Very often, almost always, the characters want to go off in another direction that I was not planning on. But so there's always a little bit of a back and forth of, oh, this is actually what's supposed to happen next. And usually I'll get back to the ending that I was planning at the beginning, but I always love it when it's a surprise.
Yeah, I like that. Like your own characters. That's funny. So you know the ending of your book before you sit down and start.
Always, yes, or at least what I think the ending is going to be. But as I said, things often change course, and you have to redirect. And sometimes it's really a puzzle. I mean, sometimes I'll get stuck in those places. I'll say, oh man, this is, it took a turn here and it wasn't what I was expecting. I know it's the right thing for the story, but now I have to figure out how to get to that ending from here rather than over there. And so sometimes it really is a puzzle to get yourself, back on the road, let's say.
For sure. Yeah. I feel like that would be really difficult because I feel like when you write, you sit down, it just kind of comes out, and sometimes you don't really know where it's coming from. Do you ever feel that way?
Me, no, because I am a plotter. I'm really a plotter, and I try my best to plan it. Now, other writers are what we call pantsers, meaning they write by the seat of their pants. And I have many friends who have no idea what's going to happen on a particular day, and they sit down and they write. And I'm very envious. I wish I could do that, but I do sort of cling to my outline as much as
Your
possible.
roadmap.
Yeah, my roadmap.
And what about the characters? Do you know who they are before you get started? Do you base them off people in your life, people you read about, the research?
Well, my historical novels always include a mixture of historical figures and fictional characters. And there are pros and cons of writing each. Certainly taking on a character like Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci is a huge burden. I mean, you bear the burden of wanting to get the facts right, wanting to do justice to the legacy of a person of that stature. Even historical people who maybe you've never heard of, I feel the same level of burden to get that right and to make sure that I've honored their, story and their legacy, even if they're a bad guy.
Yeah,
I think it's
their badness.
Yeah, it's important to try to get it, accurate. And I think readers of historical fiction expect that. They trust the novelist to have done their research, to, have sort of gotten it right, or if they fudged the facts in some way, to let the reader know and the author note at the end, how they've handled it. A fictional character, of course, you have, a blank slate. You can do anything with them, and that's what makes them wonderful in a historical novel. For The Stolen Lady, the main character in the Italian Renaissance storyline is a servant in the house of Lisa Ghiardini, who we believe is the Mona Lisa. And so being as a house servant, you have, everybody's seen Downton Abbey, you know how that goes, right?
Yeah.
You can see what's happening with the people in the house. You can see what's happening outside on the street. You can know some secrets. You get sort of the intimate view of the household, and you can run errands to important places at exactly the right time. So you can put your fictional character in the right place at the right time, when often you can't do that with a real historical personage if you're trying to be true to the historical timeline.
Mm-hmm. And do you read your book reviews? How do you feel about reading book reviews? I know a lot of writers say don't read them.
I generally don't. I know it's not because I'm a sensitive flower or anything like that, but I just, of all the millions of things that I, spend my time on, I don't often, read them in detail. It's very easy. I'm sure every creative person, can get derailed from a 1-star review, or, feel completely crushed by it. And, certainly I know that experience is very common in every creative field.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm now a middle-aged woman. I've been, a writer my whole life. I've got skin as thick as an alligator. So I really don't spend a lot of time worrying about reviews.
Yeah. And who are you writing for? When you sit down to write the book, do you have a person in mind? Do you have your dream reader in mind? Or are you writing for yourself?
That's a really good question. I think that many of my readers are very similar to me in their reading preferences. They are men and women who sometimes, very often, they're in book clubs. They like to, well, I'll give you an example. One of the best book clubs I've ever been in was with a group of friends who read all kinds of different books, but they loved historical fiction for the opportunity to learn. And we read historical novels that were set in Asia and Africa and places and time periods that we didn't know much about. And we would have these really interesting discussions, and people would bring in visual aids or things that they had found online or researched. And it was a really enriching conversation. So I think that, a reader like that who wants to kind of go behind the book or behind the scenes and learn something is a great reader for historical novel. And, certainly I count myself among that group.
Yeah, the person that wants to dig deeper after they learn something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you define creativity?
Oh, wow. Such a good question. There's so many levels to it. People make distinctions about, different types of creativity. If anyone is interested in delving into this topic further, I did a video lesson for TED called "What's the Difference Between Art and Craft?" You can find it on my website at lauramorelli.com, or you can just Google Laura Morelli, "What's the difference between art and
Yeah.
craft?" and you'll see the video there. But it's an interesting topic, and I think creativity goes into so many different fields. When I first moved to Italy, I lived in Italy for several years, and it was the moment in my life when I had decided to jump off the academic tenure track train and pursue writing. And I really thought it was kind of the end of this chapter of my life. And I went to Italy kind of looking forward to going to museums and seeing all these pictures by Leonardo da Vinci and these people that I had studied in my textbooks. But as it turned out, I moved into a house that was newly constructed and it had no bookshelves. And my husband and I hired a local team of carpenters to come in and build these bookshelves for us. Well, I called and called and called. Weeks went by, months went by, nothing. Nobody showed up. And when I called, they would say, "Oh, signora, siamo pochi, ma buoni. We're few, but we're good," which was a way of saying, well, you just have to wait. Well, when they finally arrived, this little truck pulled up in outside our house, and we thought, "Oh, great, our bookshelves are here." Well, instead, it was a truck full of lumber, and these three guys got out, and over several days, I watched them build these bookcases on site. There was the grandfather, the father, and the son. So the son was sort of the workhorse of this trio, and he did all the heavy lifting and all the work. The dad would sort of, stand back, let the son do a lot of the heavy lifting, but he would come in, make some tweaks, he would critique, he would, be watching the entire time. And then the grandfather, who at first I perceived was just doing nothing but standing outside by the truck smoking cigarettes all day, he actually at the end of each day came in and he was the quality control. And
I like
so
that.
at that moment, the light bulb went off because I went, "Oh, it's the same process that, a medieval pottery workshop operated under. It was the same process that a painting workshop in, Renaissance Paris would have worked under. It was this guild system that was still in place. And, this transmission of knowledge, this passing the torch of tradition and creativity from one generation to the next. And so that's really what sent me off to write my book Made in France and later Made in Italy, to really uncover the stories of these artisans who are passing on these incredible legacies of creativity. And you see it once you open your eyes, you see it everywhere. In France, particular, you just think about all the people who are out there making cellos and all shoes and pottery, ceramics, glass. In Paris, just think about the beautiful draperies and handmade tassels and fabrics and paper, silk, flowers, and all of those things. The creativity really reaches into so many corners in French life.
Yeah, and they're really proud and they're always like the top of their game at what they're doing.
100%, yes.
And why do you think creative people are attracted to Paris?
I think that it's fascinating that I think the French have done something a little different than elsewhere, which is they have really centralized their creative businesses. If you think about, Louis Vuitton and these big fashion brands, basically they have just consolidated these smaller artisans within a much bigger entity.
Hmm.
The idea of the manufacture, right, is made by hand when you think about it, because it's la main, it's, something that is made by hand. And so the French have this idea of made by hand on a big scale that you don't find, let's say, in Italy or in other European countries. And so I think that's one thing that makes these French creative enterprises a little bit unique.
Yeah, I never thought about that. It is interesting. And maybe people who want to create on a larger scale want to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's interested in fashion or the arts or the decorative traditions, there's no other place like it on earth.
Yeah. And do you have advice for people who are searching for their creative gifts? Maybe they think they're not good at anything. What would you say to them?
I would say think back to when you were a little kid. What made you excited to do? We're most creative, I think, when we're unencumbered little human beings like that. For me, it was about coming back to books, which is what I was really passionate about as a little kid. So think back about what you loved when you were small.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think we often forget you have to like meditate on it, depending on how old you are. Like, what did I like?
Right.
Can't even remember. And where can people connect with you online and buy The Stolen Lady? She's out.
All of my books, and I teach online art history courses, and everything I've got is at lauramorelli.com, and it's Morelli.
Perfect. And we can share that in the show notes. I can't wait to read the book. I am a historical fiction nut, so this will be great for me. And thank you so much for talking to me today, Laura.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really hope you enjoy the story.
Thanks so much for tuning in to La Vie Creative. You can find more information on MissParisPhoto.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word for all my creative guests. We have the power to help them to keep doing what they love. See you next time.